Thank you so much. It is an absolute joy to be with you all. As you can imagine, we travel a lot. We travel all over the world, and I can tell you that the welcome we've had from this church has been incredible, absolutely incredible. And I sense between ourselves that there will be an ongoing partnership between us and your church. Later on, I'll share with you a little of how you can come a little closer individually, if you want to, with Care for the Family. I have a very short Bible reading for you today. Throughout my talk, I'll be talking about the Bible and quoting it lots, but this is the very short Bible reading for you today, and it's found at the end of John's Gospel. I'll read it to you. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the world would not have room for the books that would be written. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that not even the world would have room for the books that would be written. I once saw a school photograph that made me cry. It was of 30 girls in a class, and the girl in the front looked separate from the others. She was very overweight. She looked out from behind thick pebble glasses. The other children seemed to have moved their seats away from her. I said to my friend's daughter, "Tell me about this child." Oh, they said, "She's hopeless. She comes last in all the exams. She comes last in all the races. She smells a little. Nobody ever wants to sit by her." I felt a tear roll down my face. I wanted to find something that child did remotely well and praise her for it. I wanted to say to her, "I would love to be your friend. I would love to sit by you." All kinds of people in church this morning. There are those of you who feel so close to God you could almost reach out and touch Him. There will be others for whom it seems that faith has almost died in your heart. There will be single people and married people and wealthy people and people struggling financially. Somebody will be here today that you're not at all sure what you believe, or perhaps you're quite sure you believe nothing. Somewhere here will be somebody who's been dragged here by a husband or wife. If we went outside, we'd see the heel marks in the tarmac where you bravely fought the last 50 meters. All kinds of people gathered together. You know the remarkable thing about Jesus? He sat by people that nobody else wanted to sit by. He sat by people who felt that nobody would want to sit by them. And what if He stalked into church this morning? And what if you didn't feel you really wanted to be here? What if you didn't feel part of the worship? What if you felt almost alone and He walked in and said, "Wow, Jack, Susan, could I sit by you?" Wouldn't that be something? Whoever you are, whatever you believe or don't believe, you are loved, you are welcome, and He is glad you're here. You know, I write books. I think I've written 25 books now. And you know the funny thing about writing books is you have to work out what you leave out and what you put in. They talk to you, when they're teaching you about writing, they talk about killing your darlings. You've written this incredible piece and that piece, but then you've got too many words and you think, what shall I do? Shall I take that bit out and put that bit in? And that's what happened when the Gospels were written. I know the Holy Spirit guided them, but they sat down one day and thought, well, what shall we put in? If we put it all in, the world itself could not contain the books that could be written. What are we going to put in about what He did? And they began to think about that. Fascinating thing about the biography of Jesus' life is they're different to almost every other biography you will read. If a famous person dies at 3 o'clock today, their obituary is already prepared, ready to go on the 6 o'clock news. So if Boris Johnson or anybody else or Tony Blair or whatever, they die, their obituary is all ready to roll. They'll have a little bit that they'll hurriedly put on the back of it, but their obituary is already in the archive somewhere, the BBC or the ITV or Sky News. And if you watch those obituaries, you'll see a lot of their life, the things they did, how they began in politics or the music world, and then a tiny bit about their death. Jesus' biography is different. Over a third of them given over to the last week of His life, almost the last hours of His life. Somebody said they're like an express train. They slow down. They roar through his life, his teaching, his miracles, and then they slow down. And the years become months, become a week, a days, hours, minutes. And we're watching a man die. As if somebody is saying to us, this is why he came. This is why he came. Understand this. The stories of Jesus. Unusual. Only one reference to his childhood, where his parents lost him. You ever lost a child? These parents lost the Son of God. That is pretty serious, I can tell you. This life of Jesus. What shall we put in? And somebody must have said, guys, we're going to have to put in what happened around Galilee. I remember the first time I saw Galilee. I've been to Israel many, many times. I'll tell you about a film I made a couple of years ago of the stories of Jesus in Israel. One of the greatest privileges of my life. But I remember the first time I saw Galilee, I came up this hill, and suddenly Galilee is in a great bowl there. Above them, the Golan Heights. Before Israel took possession of the Golan Heights, the Syrian tanks used to sit on top of the Golan Heights and bomb across Galilee. All the hotels on that side of Galilee had bomb shelters underneath. But now Israel has possession of the Golan Heights. But I remember sitting there and putting my feet in Galilee and all the stories coming back to me. And then I remember going back about 5 years ago when I sat on Galilee and I thought of the first time I was there and how much had happened in that 25 years. I thought of how much had happened in my own life. Pain and joy and sorrow and hope and despair and all good stuff and bad stuff all together. We sometimes think of life as hills and valleys. And Rick Warren said it's not so much like that. It's more like a railway track. And on this life there are blessings going on. And at exactly the same time there are battles going on. Blessings and battles, and some of you are going through that right now. And I thought they all were coming back to me as I sat there, and I thought, what has happened in that quarter of a century? Guy I was in ministry with for 20 years went off and had an affair. I couldn't believe it when it happened, all those stuff, and I look out onto Galilee. And a story came back that they decided to put in the Gospels. And it came to me with incredible freshness. They're on the sea. The disciples rowing. Jesus isn't with them. He's in the hills praying somewhere. And it's hard going. There's a wind there. And they're struggling and they're rowing and they're not getting very far. And as I look at and I imagine these disciples on Galilee, I think that's how I feel in my Christian life a lot. I feel as if I'm not getting very far. It's hard work. I'm not making a lot of progress. What they don't know is Jesus is watching them. And he's in the hills, and he's watching. And there's this kind of squall going, and it's windy, and they're struggling and not getting anywhere. And suddenly Jesus is walking towards them. And he's walking through the squall and through the darkness and across Galilee towards them. And they see him, and he's shouting out, "Don't be afraid. It's me." When I was a little boy, my parents didn't go to Sunday school. And they didn't go to church. But there was a little gospel hall on the corner of my street. And one day, Miss Williams, the Sunday school teacher, knocked on my door. And she said, "Would any boys or girls in this house like to come to Sunday school?" And my mother said, "He'd like to go." And Miss Williams took me by the hand and she led me down the street and into the world of Sunday school. What a woman she was. Recently, they asked me to speak at the 100th anniversary of that little church. And as I left, somebody pulled my coat. And a voice said, "Do you remember me?" It was Miss Williams. To be honest, I thought she was 110 when she came to get me when I was 4. I only just stopped myself saying, "You're still alive." Miss Williams taught me lots of great things. And Miss Williams taught me that it was important I come to Jesus. And Miss Williams was right. But I'll tell you something else. There are times in life when it's important that Jesus comes for me. Through the darkness, through the rain, through the pain, walking towards me in the storm, crying out, "It's me. Don't be afraid." Guys, we've got to put that story in. That will help them. And then, guys, we got to put in, do you remember that criticism that he always used to have? Do you remember what the religious leaders always used to say about him? They would say, why would he sit with people like that? Why would he do that? Do you remember how he answered them? Guys, do you remember he didn't talk about theology? Do you remember he told them 3 stories? Do you remember they came to us and said, why does your master eat with sinners? And he told them 3 stories. He told them the story of a shepherd. And he was counting the sheep in for the night, and there was one lost. And he told them a story of a sheep that was lost away from home. And then, do you remember, he told them the story about the woman who lost a coin at home. And then, guys, do you remember the story he told them about the 2 boys? And one was lost away from home, and one was lost at home. Somewhere in this auditorium is a prodigal. You walked away from Jesus some years ago. Maybe the first time you've come back to church. And maybe it's time that you came home. You know, I wrote a book about 20 years ago called Bringing Home the Prodigals. And shortly after I wrote that book, a woman wrote to me. She said, my daughter left when she was 18 years old. She turned her back on us and on God. We didn't see her for 6 years. We didn't know whether she was alive or dead. And as we put the lights out at night, I'd say to my husband, darling, leave the porch light on. And every Christmas, I'd put a little Christmas tree outside the front door, as we used to when she was a little girl. And Rob, when my daughter did come home, when she was 24 years old, said, Mom, Dad, I wanted to come home, but I was too ashamed to come home. But some nights in the early hours of the morning, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I would come into our street and I'd sit in my car in the darkness and I'd look around all the houses. They were all dark, apart from our house. And I knew you left the light on for me. And some nights again, early hours of the morning, I'd sit in my car and I'd look at the little Christmas tree and I knew it was for me. And ladies and gentlemen, I have said to parents all over the world, don't give up hope, keep on praying, always leave a light on. And guys, do you remember how he told it? Do you remember he said that the boy was in a pigsty? And he decided he wanted to come home. And he made up a little speech. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no more worthy to be called your son. Just make me one of your hired servants. You can kick me out after a day if it doesn't work. And as he's walking home, he's reciting this little speech. What he didn't know was every day since he'd left, his father had been climbing onto the flat roof of the little house and looking down the road. And when he sees his boy coming, he starts to run. And he throws his arms around him, and the boy begins his speech, but he never finishes it. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no. Put a robe on his back and a ring on his finger and shoes on his feet. My boy's home. I remember studying English literature years ago, and the professor who had no faith saying, I think the parable of the prodigal son may be the greatest short story ever told. I've gone all around the world talking about prodigals, and I had a remarkable experience just outside Colorado Springs. I met a pastor who told me that he had grown his church from 300 to 10,000 by welcoming back the prodigals. And he said we had an incredible story here some years ago. He said we had a hell's angel come to church. He was about 24 years old. He had long, greasy hair. He had enough ironmongery in his face to open a small hardware shop. And I hope this won't offend you in church this morning, but on these knuckles, he had initialed the letters F-U-C-K, and on these knuckles, Y-O-U. That was his statement to the world. And somebody dared him to come to church. He said he not only came to church, he walked right down the front, quite arrogant, sat right in the front row. He said, unfortunately for him, our church allocates certain seats to certain people to welcome. And he got himself in Marge Staples' area. Marge is almost 90 years old. Marge doesn't have the energy these days to argue about whether we should worship swinging from the chandeliers or using the old green hymn book. Marge doesn't much care whether the building committee built it this way round or that way round, and she certainly doesn't care whether the carpets are gray or blue. Marge is going to be in front of Jesus any day now. Marge just wants to love people. And she sees this young man and says, oh, young man, come here. It's so lovely to see you in church. Let me hug you. And she's hugging him, and she feels the metal pressing into her face, and then she feels tears. This young man is starting to cry. In fact, he doesn't stop crying until the preacher finishes speaking. Gives his life to Christ that night. 6 weeks later, a consultant plastic surgeon in that church gave him a skin graft to remove the tattoos. Frankly, he had to, because the kid was offending people as he was worshiping. When they baptized him, the wounds hadn't quite healed, and he had a little plastic bag with a rubber band on as he went under the water. I want the spirit of Marge Staples as I get older. I want to see past all the stuff. I want to love. And I can imagine the disciples saying, guys, we got to tell them that story. How we love to sit with those that nobody else would sit by. And guys, we got to tell them about somebody else. Let me try this on you. Put up your hands now this morning, right now, if your favorite disciple is John. Anybody for... Okay, we got a few for John. Put up your hand if your favorite disciple is Andrew. Andrew was always bringing people to Jesus. Anybody for Andrew? Okay, a bit light on Andrew, but not bad. Anybody for Thaddeus? Normally a couple of clever clogs put their hands up for Thaddeus, but Peter, anybody? Oh, there we go. What? Why is that? Can we put about Peter in? Imagine Peter thinking, no, guys, no. Yeah, yes, Peter, let's put in about Peter. I often wonder what kind of character Peter was. I was talking to the guys yesterday morning, and I said, if you have more than one child, you're going to have chalk and cheese. That's really annoying if your first one is compliant, because that's what lures you into having the second one. Our second one, Lloyd, was the testing one. He was born to humble us. When that kid was 14, he was driving me crazy. Honestly. I can remember being in my study, and I sat down and I reread everything I've ever written on parenting. And I've read a lot of stuff on it, and none of it helped the jot. Which I quite understand is not a great incentive for you to buy my books. I understand that. In fact, I was so at my wit's end, I did a deal with God. I know you're not meant to do a deal with God. I know that. I said, if I can see him one day with a child that stamps her foot and wags her finger and shakes her head and says, no, you can take me then. And I watch him now with Levy. Oh, my, that little girl. She stamps her foot and she wags her little finger and she shakes her little head and says, no. And I think any day now, swing low, sweet chariot. My kids have something for their kids called the thinking step. It used to be called the naughty step, but that's not politically correct now. It's the thinking step. And apparently if you're naughty, you get a minute on the thinking step for every year of your life. To be perfectly honest, I can't work out why it's such a big deal. For me, all those minutes on the thinking step would be like a spiritual retreat. Evie lives her life on the thinking step. Evie has her meals on the thinking step. At night, they tuck Evie into bed on the thinking step. And I said to Evie the other day, Evie, I love you. You drive your father crazy, and I'm grateful to you for that. I honestly think Peter was that kind of boy. You know, John Stott reckoned that many of the disciples were very young. Although Peter was married, he reckoned many of them were teenagers. Very young, and I reckon he was that guy. I remember George Brewer was saying to me, Rob, do you realize Peter was always getting wet? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, Jesus is walking on the water. And Peter says, ask me to walk on the water with you. Now, every painting you've ever seen of that shows Peter up to his neck sinking. But that's only half the story. It is true that when he got back into the boat, the others said, Peter, you're crazy. We're so near the shore and you're wet and we're dry. And it is true, he sank. But I can imagine him saying, but I did walk on the water. And perhaps if he'd never done that, he'd have never got up on the day of Pentecost and spoken on that incredible day. And that was after the resurrection. And the disciples are a little depressed and they go back fishing. And John says, there's a figure on the shore. And John says, it's the master. And they start rowing for the shore. Not Peter. Peter's diving and he's swimming for Jesus. That's Peter. He's just that kind of guy, always getting into trouble. Can you imagine what it must have been like if there were school reports in Peter's day? To be Peter's mother. Dear Mrs. Levi, I'm sorry to tell you that Peter almost ruined the transfiguration today with a silly comment on the mountain. Dear Mrs. Levi, I'm sorry to tell you that the master had to tell Peter to get behind him today. Another silly comment. Dear Mrs. Levi, I'm sorry to tell you that Peter denied the master today. Dear Mrs. Levi, I'm sorry to tell you that Peter almost drowned on Galilee trying to walk on the thing today. Dear Mrs. Levi, I'm sorry to tell you that Peter took somebody's ear off in the garden today. It just went on and on and on. Jesus put his arm around him. Satan has desired to have you that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you. He could see all that that young man would become. All that he could become. Do you know, I sometimes think, what if there are school reports in heaven? What if they look at my daily report? I sometimes imagine a report that says, I'm sorry to tell you that Robert finds it hard to pray. Sometimes finds it hard to pray even for 10 minutes. I'm sorry to tell you that Robert is using the Bible in a year, and in November he's only just on Leviticus. I'm sorry to tell you that sometimes Robert gets bored in church and starts counting the lights in the ceiling, even though he knows exactly how many there are up there. Sometimes I feel like that. I was telling the guys yesterday, I wake up once a month too early. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. And a voice in this ear says, you know what, Rob, if people really knew you, they wouldn't come and hear you speak. They wouldn't buy your books. To be honest, Rob, you're a bit of a hypocrite. You don't pray enough, you don't share your faith enough, you don't read the word enough. You're a bit, I get that at least once a month. But if I'm fortunate, I hear a voice in this other ear that says, I know you. I know you better than you know yourself. I'm not as impressed with the books as you appear to be, but I still love you. Nothing you do can make me love you more. Nothing you do can make me love you less. Rob, don't take yourself too seriously. I love you. I am for you. Peter understood that. Peter understood that incredible message. You know, I was speaking in Spring Harvest some years ago, 4,000 people in the big top. And when I finished speaking, a guy got up and he told a story. It took him 2 minutes to tell. And the second he finished telling it, I knew if he told it at the beginning, I need never have spoken. This is a story he told that night. He said, I had a great relationship with my mum and dad, but in his 80s, Dad had a stroke. Couldn't speak. He said, Dad found that hard. He used to love to talk to me. And he said, one night I rang my mum and said, Mum, I'm doing some business near your home the next day. Can I come and stay the night? Of course you can, son. And he said, it's about 10 o'clock at night, and Mum and I are speaking with great animation, but Dad can only smile at me. And about 11:15, I go up, and they've given me the old bedroom I had when I was a boy. And I'm lying there. And I'm imagining a Spitfire plane on the left-hand wall and rugby boots and a cricket bat, and I begin to fall off to sleep. There's a knock at the door. And it's my dad. And I'm a bit surprised by that, but I shout, well, come in. And he comes to my bed and he looks down. And he can't say anything, but he sees there's some hair in my eye, and he licks his finger and pushes it back across my forehead. And then he tucks the bedclothes in around me and straightens the top sheet, as he used to when I was a little boy. Bent over me, kissed me, smiled, and left. And he said, I am lying there, and I'm 45 years of age. And I got kids of my own, I got people who work for me, and I have just been tucked into bed by my own father. And boy, didn't it feel good. And Jeff looked out at 4,000 people and said, God wants to do that for you. He is your father. And I can remember Jesus saying to those disciples, when you pray, do this. Close the door and say, Our Father. He is your Father. How many times did he have to say that to Peter? I am for you. I am with you. And there's somebody here today and you feel a rubbish Christian, but he has plans for you. Do you know, when I was about 19, I joined a gospel group. And I wasn't much of a guitarist. The rhythm guitar, we had a lead guitar, a rhythm guitar, and a bass guitar and drums. And the rhythm guitar went to Canada, and they gave me the task of being rhythm guitar, but I was a rubbish guitarist. But because I could speak a bit and do some sermons, they let me stay in the group. They gave me a 12-string guitar. I couldn't tune this thing, let alone play it. When they did difficult chords, I used to just airbrush them. And when I was 20, they said, we're going to London to make a record. Wow, my mother couldn't believe it. She told all our friends and neighbors, we're going to London. My boy's going to London to make a record. And we arrive in London to make the record. And we're in the studio. And the producer listens, and he says, there's something wrong. And to my horror, he said, let's listen to the individual instruments. The drum's fine, lead guitar, and there's me, plinkety, plonkety, crunch. They kicked me off the record. I couldn't bear that my mother still believed the day she died I was on the record, I think. So I could only really do C, F, and G7, Puff the Magic Dragon. I was hopeless, yeah? But when I was about 52, I decided I was going to have guitar lessons again. And I found a guy in Cardiff that gave guitar lessons, and I sat down with him on the first night, and I told him that story. He said, well, don't worry, we'll work hard. And we had about 10 lessons. And then he said, well, Rob, I'm away for a fortnight now, and I know you're on a holiday fortnight, so you've got a month to practice this song. And he gave me Knock, Knock, Knocking on Heaven's Door. Clapton song. I gave that song everything I had. Now, preachers sometimes say things just for effect, but this is not for effect, this is the truth. When he came back, and I played it to him, and I finished it, I felt pretty good. I shook the guitar at the end as I'd seen him do on television. And I honestly thought that he might say, wow. Well, I've heard Clapton, but wow. What he actually said was, I can see why they kicked you off that record. He said, you haven't got any rhythm, have you? Let me tell you something. By then, I'd been a senior part of a 10-office law practice. I'd lectured all over the world to more blue-chip companies that you can shake a stick at. Some governments. I'd written some books. I'd done this, I'd done that. I never went back for a second lesson. That's the power of words. The power of words. Let me contrast that. In our church, we have a young lady that gives piano lessons. And Doris wanted piano lessons. She was well into her 70s. And somebody gave her £50 to buy 6 piano lessons or something. And the time came when all the students in church were going to present. And she brought all the students in New Start Church to have their kind of concert, to show off. But Doris had very bad arthritis, and she wasn't very good. And we all had our hearts in our mouths as Doris took the podium and sat in front of the piano. And then she began pretty good, and then she just froze. And some wrong notes, and then suddenly the most beautiful piano music again, and then we could see what had happened. Her young tutor was behind her, and she put her young fingers over Doris's gnarled fingers, and she was playing with her. And when Doris got her confidence back, she took her fingers off again, and then Doris did pretty well for a while, and then the hands came back. And who is my Heavenly Father like? Is he like my guitar tutor? Or is he like that piano tutor? He is like the piano tutor. He puts his arms around me. He is for me. He is there. Rob, I am for you. We got to tell him about Peter. And we got to tell him about that last night. Do you remember that last night, guys? Do you remember? Remember when he said to Peter and John, get me somewhere ready for the Passover. Guys, do you remember when we put the key in that door? We had no idea what was going to happen the next 24 hours. Gosh, he was dead and buried within 24 hours. Do you remember what happened? Do you remember? We went in and nobody wanted to wash anybody else's feet. We just had that row on the road about who should be greatest. And nobody wanted to wash anybody else's feet. And then do you remember what he did? Do you remember that he got a towel and a bowl and he began to wash our feet? Do you remember what Peter said? No, and he made him have his feet washed. And then, do you remember what he said to us? He said, I am your Lord and Master. And I have washed you. You must wash each other's feet. You must love each other. Guys, we've got to love each other. You've got to love those who aren't like you. We've got to learn to love those who don't worship as we do. We've got to learn to love those who sometimes hurt us, particularly in local church life. Somebody said to me years ago, an old man, when the Father's house is filled with the Father's love, the prodigals will come home. You've got an incredible church, but can I beg you to love each other? Don't just become another casualty in 5 years, 10 years, groups of people fighting each other, standing against each other, committees, emails, all that kind of stuff. Don't go down there. Love each other. Be honest with each other, but love each other. Forgive each other. Let each other off the hook. Jesus said, in the measure you judge, you will be judged. What a great incentive to be easy with people. So forget it. You did hurt me, but forget it. I forgive you, if you possibly can. You must love each other, he said. Do you remember him telling that to us? And then do you remember what he said in that room? Do you remember our heads reeling? Do you remember the 3 things he told us? He said, one of you is going to betray me. And do you remember when he said then, one of you is going to deny me? And then worst of all, he said he was going. Do you remember that? And he said, where I'm going, you can come. And he began to talk about another place. And do you remember Thomas saying, well, we don't know the way. And he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Guys, do you remember how he put it? He said, in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And although he told us lots of stuff we were going to do on earth, although he commissioned us, do you remember how he lifted our eyes to that other world? People will need to know that, because their lives are going to be tough. They're going to need to know this is not all there is. We've got to put that in. Put that in, that we live our eyes. Do you know, I can remember my friend, Dr. R.D. Kendall, telling me about an old missionary who'd served God 50 years in Africa. I think it was in the 1920s, and he came back to New York for his first furlough. And as the ship is coming into New York Harbor, he wondered if there'll be anybody to meet him. And then he heard a band, and he thought, wow, they've got a little band together to greet me. But it wasn't a little band, it was a big band, because the President of the United States was on that boat, and they greeted him. But because the President was on the boat, all the other passengers were delayed. And by the time the old missionary got off, it was raining and dark, and the dockside was completely empty. He picked up his case, and he found a cheap motel. And he knelt by the bed, and he cried. And he said, oh God, this man has been on a 15-day holiday in Africa. And he's come back and there's a great welcome. I have served you 50 long years. And for me, there is no welcome home. And then he heard it. The voice in his heart that said, you're not home yet. You're not home yet. I want you to live your life with your eyes on that other world. It won't explain all the pain. Don't let people give you easy answers to pain. But it will make sense of so much, and it will give you hope. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are being troubled, there are troubles. Inwardly we are being renewed day by day. And our light and momentary trouble is achieving for us a glory that far outweighs them all. So, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen will last forever. Guys, I'm going to tell you before I go my favorite story in the whole world. But first of all, very quickly, I want to tell you, and Ian has very kindly said I can do this, if you want to get involved with Care for the Family, how you do it. When you came in, you got this little booklet. In the back, there's a little yellow form. And if you want to become a partner with us, just fill it in. Give little bit every month, £2, £3. Keep it going for as long or short as you want. Fill your bank details in. If you don't remember them all, fill in what you can and sign it. And when I finish, I'm going to be at the Care for the Family stand at the back. Some of you are already partners with us, and if so, you may want to increase a little. Perhaps you fill the little red form in. I genuinely want our partnerships to be two-way affairs, and I put together, I think, a lovely pack which you'll enjoy. A hardback copy of my book, The Wisdom House. I was telling, I think, the guys yesterday, when I was a little boy, my mum could read and write, but not much more than that. But she used to tell me of a land far away where, as people got older, they would write a life lesson on a scroll. And they'd keep those scrolls in a hut in the center of the village. And every so often, they would gather people around and read those life lessons to them. They called that place the Wisdom House. And I wanted to create for my grandchildren a wisdom house, so I wrote that book. It covers things like handling difficult people. Put up your hand if you've got a difficult person in your life. Oh, some of you are obviously sat next to your difficult person. About pursuing your dreams. I want you to know you've got a right to your dreams. You haven't got a right to them being fulfilled, but you've got a right to your dreams. What is the true nature of love? I talk about it in the Wisdom House, and I'd like to sign a copy of that to you personally and date it to mark the day you became a partner with Care for the Family. And then one of the greatest privileges of my life, a television company took me to Israel 2 years ago and asked me to film the stories of Jesus. I sat by Galilee and told the story of the storm. I told the story of the woman caught in adultery. I can remember saying these words, and he says to her, well, where are your accusers? None, Lord. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Forever changed. I'd love to give you a copy of that film. Oh, look what else I've got here. Here's Catherine Hill's book on marriage. You may not be married, but a lovely gift for somebody. If you forget everything else, remember this: building a great marriage. All stuff here: conflict, communication, sex. I ran a seminar last night, and I was talking to them about that. Do you know, as you get older, it does change a bit. Dan said to me the other day, darling, would you like to come upstairs and make love? I said, sweetheart, I can either do one thing or the other. I think you would enjoy that book. Oh, look at this. When my son Lloyd was 17, my testing one, he said, Dad, can we write a book together? I said, son, you've never read a book. He said, I said, what do you want to write the book on? He said, I want to write a book on silly things the parents say to kids. And I said, things like what? He said, things like this. Would you like a smack? Don't come running to me if you break your leg. Well, where did you lose it? We argued over this last one. He said, Dad, you did say it. You said it to me when I was 4 years old. Don't be childish. Here's my favorite one in here, little from James, age 6. Listen to this, bless him. It's age 10, actually. When I was 5, they gave us silver stars in school if we worked hard. When I was 6, they gave us gold stars if we worked very hard. When I was 7, I discovered you could buy stars in stationery shops. I was 50 before I discovered you could buy stars in stationery shops. And here's the book that changed my life, 1984. One of the lowest moments of my life. And somebody gave me a book by Lewis Smeets, How Can Everything Be All Right When Everything's All Wrong? It went out of print and Smeets died, and I said to my publishers, if you can get the rights to this book back, we'll publish it. And they brought out as Rob Parsons the book that changed my life. But it's Smeets' book. I write a 2,000-word introduction. Guys, if you see anything you can't afford, including all of that, if you drop us a line to Care for the Family, we'll gladly send it to you free of charge. So it's not a big sales pitch. But if you can help us, no matter how small, fill the little form in. When I finish speaking, bring it to the back and I'll be there. Let me give you that pack. Let me sign a book to you to mark personally the day you became a partner with Care for the Family. We'll see if we can do some good together. What shall we put in? Let's tell them some of the things that happened on Galilee. Remember the woman who reached out and touched his cloak? You remember as if time froze? Do you remember when he said, who touched me? And she came out. And do you remember the lovely thing he said? Daughter, your faith has saved you. Let's tell him about Peter. Let's tell him about the upper room. Let's tell him to believe in another world. So I can tell you now my favorite story in the whole world. It's of a little boy whose parents owned one of the very first telephones. He lived on the plains in Montana, and he said, I remember the day it was delivered. It was a little wooden box, and Mum would wind it up, and she would say, information, please, and a voice would say, this is information. And information, please, would get them the weather or the time or just anything. Information, please, was unbelievable. And when I was 9 years old, my mum and dad were out, and I banged my thumb with a hammer. And there was no point crying because there was nobody in. And then I remembered the telephone. And I got a little stool, and I stood on it, and I wound it up, and I said, information, please. And a voice said, this is information. And I said, I banged my thumb. And information, please, said, is your mummy in? No. Is your daddy in? No. Is it bleeding? No. Could you get to the ice box? Yes. Hold some ice against it. He said it worked. He said, after that, I rang information, please, for anything. Information, please, help me with my geography homework. She told me where Pennsylvania is. Information, please, taught me to spell disappear. And when my pet canary died, I cried and said, why would God make anything that can sing so beautifully and let it die? Information, please, said, Paul, you must always remember there are other worlds to sing in. And then my mum and dad moved to New York City, and I was out of her area. And anyway, I didn't believe information, please, could live in this new plastic phone, and I never rang her again till I was 24 years old. And I flew into my old town, and I'm in the airport lounge, and I look at the phone and think, I wonder. And I dial, and I say, information, please, and a voice says, this is information. And I said, could you teach me to spell disappear? And she said, I expect that thumb is better by now. And I said, have you any idea what you meant to me? She said, have you any idea what you meant to me? We couldn't have children of our own. I still love it when you rang me. Now, I'm very old. I only come in a couple of hours a week. But if you're in my area, please try me. Remember, my name's Sally, and I promised her I would. And sometimes I would get her. And one day I rang. And I said, information, please. And a different voice said, this is information. And I said, could I speak to Sally, please? And she said, oh, sir, I'm sorry to tell you, Sally died a couple of weeks ago. She was very old. She only came in occasionally. Oh, I'm sorry to have troubled you. No, wait. Is your name Paul? Why, yes, it is. Well, sir, Sally said, if you happen to ring, we must be sure to give you this message. Paul, you must always remember there are other worlds to sing in. That world is more real than this. Life is not fair. Bad things happen to good people. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. Don't lose heart. God bless you. Thank you for your welcome.